As journalists and television hosts, scripts are a lifeline. Each newscast, each story, it all revolves around a script.
But now it's time to go unscripted. That means we're not just going off script, we're throwing out the script altogether.
Each week, we're joined by fellow Farm Journal hosts and editors to peel back the layers on stories we've shared throughout the week.
Unscripted. It's real, it's raw, it's entertaining, and it's your chance to meet the personalities behind the personalities. I'm Tyne Morgan.
And I'm Clinton Griffiths. Welcome to Unscripted.
I feel like we need a big crescendo time. Like there should be like cymbals or some sort of explosion when we come on. Maybe Zach can get that done for us.
Listen, it's Super Bowl weekend in Kansas City. There's going to be plenty of that happening. Fireworks.
Super Bowl weekend, Kansas City. I wonder who you're cheering for this weekend.
I don't know. I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't know who I'll be cheering for. You know, we moved back to Kansas City in January of 2019. And really, we moved back at a perfect time. I don't want to credit the Chiefs' success.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. Are you saying what I think you're saying?
I mean, I don't want to connect those dots because that would be pretty arrogant. But I'm just saying not everything is a coincidence.
Statistics don't lie.
Not everything is a coincidence. Let's be honest.
Well, let me tell you my professional football story time.
Yep.
I grew up in New Mexico, 30 miles from the border. We did not have a professional in New Mexico. We did not have a professional football team in the state. I know you're surprised. And so it was, you either cheered for the Dallas Cowboys, you cheered for the Cardinals in Phoenix, or you cheered for the Denver Broncos.
Oh.
I didn't like any of them. So I had a hard time till I really got to college and started playing fantasy football. And then I just cheered for players. And so anyway, I enjoy the game. I like to watch it, but I don't really have a team. I'm never really invested. Now, I do like the commercials in the Super Bowl. That is a big reason I watch. You know, it's my favorite part of the Super Bowl. I don't know. They've been kind of lame lately.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, and now I don't watch the Super Bowl for the commercials. I used to. I mean, I remember I had
since you moved back. Yeah, of course.
I remember I had a marketing class in college where that's what we had to do. We had to watch the Super Bowls and then rank them. And then we had a test, to go over some of the strategies that they use. But now, of course, we watch it for the game. I will say, though, my husband's from Texas. So he used to be a Cowboys fan. That's just in Texas. You grow up being a Cowboys fan.
Of course.
Until
there's another team there. There's another team in Texas. It's not just one.
I don't think I've heard of them. I'm kidding. I have family that lives in Houston. But most Dallas Cowboys, most people that are in Texas, especially in his area of the Panhandle, and then, also the Dallas area, you're a Cowboys fan until Jerry Jones pisses you off, which is done to the majority of Texas. And so James has become a Chiefs fan, and Patrick Mahomes played at Texas Tech. James grew up just north of Texas Tech. So, but Clinton, the deal is for the podcast, it's Super Bowl weekend. So we had to raise the bar.
Oh, we did.
And with our guests. And, when I watch Patrick Mahomes, I am just awed by the magic he performs on the field, right?
Oh, sure.
You know who I'm in awe of for the magic he sees and can make when it comes to talking about markets and policy and geopolitics?
Oh, I don't know. Who?
The magician himself, Dan Basse. Let's bring Dan on the program.
Dan, hey, how's it going? Enough that stuff. I tell you, Tyne, that's you can butter me up a little bit, but that's too much.
Now, Dan, you're based in Chicago. Are you a Bears fan?
I am a Bears fan. So I always tell my wife, there's three things you can't change about me: my religion, my sexual preference, and my football team. So the Bears are it. And we've gone a long time without a win. We keep changing coaches. Miss McCaskey passed away yesterday at 102, bless her soul. But here we are, and I don't even know who to pick in tomorrow's game, but I'll side a little bit with the Chiefs just because we like a three-peat. But again, it'll be a lot of fun.
So, quick question: the Bears, are they going to sort it out in the next year?
I really have high hopes that next year could be the start of something. We've keep going for draft choices, as you know, and we've got the 10th pick this year. We had the first pick last year, so we're excited about our future, and we think we finally have the right coach and going forward. So let's see what happens. But I always say that with crossed fingers and hands because the past hasn't turned out so well.
Dan, you have not lived in Chicago your whole life. I know you've lived in Chicago a long time.
I grew up on a farm in southeast Wisconsin, Muskego, Wisconsin, a dairy farm, and so a Guernsey farm. And so I grew up as a Packers fan, but moving to Chicago in 1986, I converted to the Bears. And the rivalry, I never know which team to pick, but I've been leaning with the Bears just because they're the home team favorite here, at least at the moment.
Interesting. So, Dan, is that what got you interested in the commodity markets and really trying to follow this connection between agriculture and protecting farms? I mean, is it just go back to your roots there?
I wish I could say it was, Clint. I went to school to become a veterinarian, and I was in vet school, and I went and worked with a small vet. We all grow up in farms, and we know and understand the large vet, but this was a small vet, and it was Verona, Wisconsin. And in that summer, he had me pretty much working with small animals, and about 30% of that job was putting down cats and dogs. The family all gets around the table, the syringe gets pushed and the eyes close and everybody cries. I went through that for about 3 months and I said, I am not going to be a veterinarian. And so I left town on that, and I decided there was a very good professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison where I went to school who did the Maine potato futures contract. And I got involved with him and started key punching, modeling, if you will, on the commodity markets. And this point, it was hogs, because I went to school raising hogs to pay for my college tuition. And with that, I made some money. Some years lost some money, other years. And I started to get involved with the hog futures. I kind of fell in love with it, and I haven't been able to get the needle out of my arm since. And so that's kind of where we are today.
Well, and see, I didn't know much about your background until I was heading to World Dairy Expo one year and said that I was going to be there. And then I get a message from you and said, I'll see you there. And I'm like, why are you going to be at World Dairy? And you said, well, I show every year at World Dairy. So it's not like it's something that the farm is removed. I mean, you still are active in showing. I was impressed.
No, we have a high-end herd of Guernseys in Ohio named Spring Hill, and we do very well. Last year, we were the premier breeder and exhibitor, so we're very proud of our position. So I like the Guernsey cow. I'm now even building a creamery in which we're trying to make, cheese, butter, and all the dairy products from the farm. So I'm practicing to become a master cheese and butter and ice cream maker. So that's my next hobby here going forward.
Listen, if you need a taste tester, I know Johnny. I know a guy that would be willing for science to jump in for you. I'm just saying.
You're on my list. I'll put you down because my people in Ohio are getting sick of me sending ice cream flavors and asking them which is their favorite.
I'm more than willing to be a tester.
Me too. I was just thinking, for as much butter and ice cream and cheese as I buy at this house, maybe we should just put in a creamery here in rural Oric, Missouri, and maybe we'll end up saving money in the end, because we definitely are. So when is it operational yet?
We're expecting to be operational in the early spring. So we're opening up the store in the operation in the early. It's called the Burbank, Ohio. It's supposed to be April, May. So everything's going in. The building's built. It's just getting the right installation. And in the dairy industry, there's a lot of these small creameries going in right now. So finding the right people and the right equipment has been a little challenging.
We had a story on Ag Day this morning about a small dairy and creamery in Pennsylvania. And they have changed their flavors, and they have a flavor, the Tush Pistachio. Tush Pistachio. Anyway, it was so funny. They came up with all of these fun flavors for the Eagles into the Super Bowl this year.
I've seen quite a few dairies. Because you're in dairy country out there, and Eagles fans. And so I've seen quite a few of those cute pictures. We have. It's called Chateau Milk Company, and they've been around for a while. And each year, when the Chiefs are in the playoffs, now Super Bowl, they'll have red velvet flavored milk that's red, and then they'll have gold, and then they'll have red and gold cheese curds. I mean, there's a lot of it makes it fun. It's fun to see the dairy folks get in on it and get in on some of the Super Bowl action.
Dan, as you said, you started working in the potato
futures. Yeah, we used to trade Maine potato futures long ago. It was a big futures contract that has gone away. I mean, there's several of that, barley, potatoes, those kind of things. This is how old I am, everyone. You got to understand. But if you think about the potato market, they all moved to Idaho. The Simplots and others kind of took over the potato markets. McDonald's came along, and potato futures went away because price volatility moved to a contractual basis. And so with that, the potato futures are no longer with us. There was also a small disease in Maine that helped that whole process. But it's like pork bellies and barley. It's a contract of the past.
Dan, there's one processor in Idaho that like processes all of the French fries for McDonald's. I mean, it is crazy out there. I was at Potato Expo a few weeks ago where my husband was, and somebody came up to him and said, "I recognize you. You were on Unscripted." And so then
big time.
That's how they recognize James. And then they got to talking, and so I ended up meeting them. Super nice couple. But they were explaining that they supplied to one of the largest potato processors right there and invited us out. So I think we're going to come out this summer. But it's super interesting just to see how that industry has changed, just like so many industries have changed in ag. But out of all of them, Dan, I mean, when did you get in the business? What year was that?
I started in 1979. This is my 45th year of being in the commodity business. So. Like I said, the needle is in pretty deep at this point, and I don't know how to get it out, but it's a lot of fun yet. So I've seen a lot of things change and happen, and agriculture from that period to where we are is really dynamic, and I'm excited to be where we are today.
Dan, how do you feel about the change from the pits? And then I guess maybe it's nostalgia, right? The excitement of the pits and everything being traded at the CME and, runners and all of that versus kind of the electronic style trading we have now. Is it different, or is it you miss some of that?
I miss it. And what I miss is I still have a membership to the Board of Trade. So as a media person back then, writing newsletters and being an economist, I used to go to the floor, being in Chicago across the street, and talk to traders, understand what was going on in the market, and be in the thick of it. Mm-hmm. And it's that personal relationship. I didn't enjoy people spitting on each other, but short of that, it was all good. But it was that interaction of person to person, trader to trader that really, I think, made the business as it is today. And back then, the Board of Trade was really protecting the markets, and they did a good job of it, or the CME. Today, it's a for-profit corporation. We now trade on screens. It's all computer-based. It doesn't have the same rhyme. It doesn't have the same faces, and there's surely no personalities. And so it's the personalities that came through the commodities industry that, God, I can just go back. Harry the Hat, and I can give you a bunch of other names. Sam Roller, who just, what used to happen every day is we trade to 130. Everybody would head to the bar at the sign of the trader at the bottom of the Board of Trade. We'd all talk about the markets, go home about 4:35, and start it all over the next day. Mm-hmm. It was a lot of fun, a lot of wear and tear on all of us, but I think the markets really performed well back then.
And that's my granddad was in politics. And he said the same thing. He said, Tyne, before he passed away, he said, what's wrong with politics today and what's changed is they no longer, after they get done voting, do they go play cards at night together. He said, whenever I was his was state, so he was in Jeff City. But he said, we always, after we got done, we had cards together. Some of us roomed together. Like, there was that camaraderie that they just don't have today. And he said, that's what we're missing. But real quick, I think actually this is going to lead into our next segment because I've got a question about the pits. Okay. So let's go into our first segment, Talking Teeth. Okay. So you mentioned spitting on each other, and I know that you saw some wild stuff on the floor. I've only heard stories. I've only seen, pictures or videos. Dan, what is the wildest thing that you saw when you were at the CME and in the pits and on the floor?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of times that you could imagine there was pencil jabs where people would go to, you didn't like your fill or whatever happened, and someone would just take and jab you with a pencil. That was relatively common. The other things that would happen is, you didn't want to go to the bathroom with someone who you did a bad trade with, or you had an out trade with, or something like that, because you didn't know if a fist was coming at you. It truly was. You call it unscripted. It was uncharacteristically wild, and so when you've got that much money and that much emotion circulating in a small space, you can imagine that fist fights and pen grabs and stabs and all those kind of things happen. And it was just the way it is. And, the moderate aspect of it is you did a trade with somebody you didn't like, they just would look the other way and not trade with you anymore. But it did get very forceful when a lot of money was involved. So, humans are humans. There's always out trades. You tried to work it through, but sometimes it did spill over to the streets and we had problems.
Oh my gosh. So you're right. You mix all that money together and you mix the passion and the anxiety that came with trading, and you mix all of the probably pent up, emotion in it. It probably did spill over into some of that. I'm sure.
No, it did. But at the end of the day, Clint, the honesty that prevailed on the floor was something that was to be beholden. And so we always worked things through. It never went to court. We always figured it out. There was always another day, and we took our lumps or we took our gains and we went on with life. And there's some of that I would like to have happen yet today. But we always worked it out before the next opening. Trades were taken care of and things were made right.
Are there a lot of those like restaurants and bars that you guys went to after hours, after you got done out on the floor? Have a lot of those closed down there? Because I have to imagine, Dan, it's pretty dead.
Yeah, the sign of the trader is no longer there. If someone visits Chicago, they want to go to the sign of the trader. It's no longer there. There's still a restaurant in the first floor of the Board of Trade, but downtown has changed dramatically and not for the good. And so there's lots of office space open. I know in my building where I have an office downtown, it houses 15,000 people. And the guard was telling me on a good day, 400 to 450 people show up. So if you think about restaurants or other trades within the downtown Chicago area, they can't stay in business with that kind of traffic.
Wow, that is wild. Hey, Dan, obviously you've been doing this a long time. You have kept up with what's happening. Obviously, the fundamentals and way that the markets move, what's influencing markets. As we kind of start 2025 and we have a new administration in place and stuff's moving in Washington, is there anything on your radar of like, hey, this is something that I'm keeping a really close eye on as we move into this year?
Well, the one thing that has my attention, obviously, outside of the tariffs and everything that's going on with Washington and the volatility of headlines that comes with President Trump, is what I call I sit in a lot of meetings where we talk about AI trading, where, it is hands off, where things like momentum or headlines drive what's happening every day. And so I am a little concerned about all of these boxes, if you will, that trade in the same direction, because they do amplify what's happening in the industry and make sure from time to time that the fundamentals that the grain markets are based upon can get out of whack. And so if you were to ask me what is keeping me up at night or what I think is different today from when I started, it is exactly that. And that AI trading I think it needs to be watched. And I first got in this business, Clint, the biggest long position you could have was 600 contracts. Today, that's up to 16,000 contracts. And so, 10 people each buying the limit position on the Chicago Board of Trade, 160,000 contracts can really have a big influence on price. So I'm not saying 10 people control the corn market, but it is down to a smaller number than I feel comfortable with.
No, that's fascinating.
You mentioned trade. And we know in this environment that we're trading headlines. It happens and one little thing's tweeted and then 30 minutes later that could be outdated because something else is tweeted. We just know we're in that environment. But as you look at this week and on the weekend, President Trump followed through with his promise to implement tariffs on Mexico and Canada. And then by early this week, he had talked to the president and the prime minister, and they had resolved things and we're putting it off at least another 30 days. Dan, do you think that things can get resolved in 30 days? Are you worried at all about entering another trade war?
No, I think if you listen to the Secretary of Treasury, Bennett, or if you listen to, Greer, who testified yesterday for U.S. Trade Representative, they are all looking to build revenue through tariffs. So the trade wars or the trade tariff things are only just starting. I imagine if we look forward to early March, Canada and Mexico will be brought back in the crosshairs of tariffs. China's still there. I mean, the one thing I always say about tariffs as an economist, is that once tariffs are put in place, they're very, very hard to come off. I mean, you look back in history from 1820 to 1933, tariffs were the way of life in trading agriculturally and around the world. And so during that time, Smoot-Hawley came on. We put 2,300 additional tariffs on, and it precipitated to some degree the Great Depression. That Great Depression got rid of tariffs for the next 70 years. Here we are back at it again. But if I look back to Trump tariffs of 2018, they are still in existence today. No one's proposing they're coming down. And I would imagine we're going to see more countries ensnarled in this whole thing. And so my big concern with tariffs is not the tariffs and how they're used to help the American economy, just how long lasting they may be for the American farmer.
Dan, when I was growing up, I can still remember the presidential debate with Ross Perot, where he made the comment about the NAFTA trade agreement. And, then we kind of ushered in this era of free trade. I guess the question I've continued to ask, myself and others is free trade dead? I mean, have we moved past this era of free trade in the global economy?
I think we've shifted from it, Clint. I think that, the other thing that's happening is I don't want to talk about the end of globalism, but I do think we're moving on different paths. We call it at AgResource a duopoly, in which the world is now moving in a BRICS fashion and in a G7 fashion. And I was doing a meeting 2 weeks ago, and what really surprised me when I put together some of my work was that the BRIC countries now account for a larger share of GDP, global GDP, at 42% than the G7 countries. And so this has not happened before. And so when you hear President Trump he's talking about the BRIC countries not having their own currency, I think he's seriously worried in that as we get this duopoly of paths going forward, this is going to be problematic for G7 as we're raising debt and doing a lot of other things that the BRIC countries are not today. So BRIC countries also have 42% of world oil. So they've got the right resources. They can do the right things. And Belt and Road from China was really smart on their part to expand their footprint to have a free trade zone that so far we in the United States can't participate in.
Dan, when it comes to China, the fact that we only saw an announcement of the retaliatory tariffs on ag equipment. And I know that, we're still trying to figure out how much ag equipment do we even export to China. I'm trying to figure that out. We have, I don't know. We've asked the Association of Equipment Manufacturers. I mean, we've asked a ton of questions trying to figure out how much do we actually export. But in agriculture, the fact that we did not see more tariffs on some of our key commodities, did we dodge something there, Dan? And were you surprised?
Well, like Canada, Mexico, I think the president was very interested in terms of trying to get fentanyl and border issues and those kind of things taken care of. And China's a big supplier of fentanyl to the United States. So it was kind of a salvo, if you will, going forward. But, on the other side of this, if you listen to what's being said by some of his appointees, if for China to get any reduction or even a pause on tariffs, they got to go back and adhere to the old 2020 phase one trade agreement. By our calculations, that means that China would have to, put down or spend for American goods some $85 billion just to get back to where they were in their agreement on phase one. And then we can talk about what the future really looks like if there's a continuance of it. So, a 10% tariff on Chinese trade is $29 billion. That's not going to bother them too much. I think tariffs have got to go higher. If they maybe get above that $85 billion, then China maybe would think about starting the negotiations. But today, Tyne, I'm kind of in this position. I don't think the Chinese are going to be buying anything from the United States. They've spent the last 4 years diversifying their suppliers, and at least at the moment, they're in good shape on that.
We will be right back after a word from our sponsor.
We can't control the weather. We can't affect the global demand for corn and soy. We can't even fix that piece of equipment you swear is still good if you just have the right part. But BASF can offer you 0% financing on our proven, consistent performing fungicides. Our grower finance program is here to help you maximize your yield potential and savings with 0% APR on some of the highest performing fungicides available until March 15th, 2025. Because now more than ever, every dollar counts, and you can't beat 0% financing on innovative corn and soybean fungicides like Revitech fungicide, Revilock fungicide, and Veltima fungicide. Keep more in your wallet while improving your yield potential. Talk to your BASF retailer today about the Grower Finance Program to lock in 0% APR. Subject to credit approval, terms, and conditions. See BASF Grower Finance Program for details. Always read and follow label directions.
One of the things that I was at the Northern Corn and Soybean Expo in Fargo, North Dakota this week. Lovely this time of year. I recommend it if anybody's looking for a place to visit.
Very nice people. Let's say that. Very nice people.
They were awesome. It was a wonderful people. It was a fantastic trip. I really enjoyed visiting with everybody. But it was a little chilly. One of the things that we talked about there, and they had a vice president with Delta Airlines stop in. They had a couple of people that are working in the renewable diesel biofuels SAF arena. Dan, I think we have a graphic that shows the amount of SAF we've produced and consumed in this country. We're up at like 25 million gallons. But, Delta, they've put the number by 2030. They want to be at 3 billion gallons. So we've got a long way to go to meet that demand. And they're still excited about the potential of this market, Dan, going forward. And I think you heard that from the USTR yesterday, bring up biofuels and SAF, that's still part of the mix. It's part of the conversation from this administration when they're talking about domestic fuels and fuel production. And so what's your take on where we sit at this? Because we keep talking about export markets. The reality is we've got South America that is taking a lot of that business with China from us. We need some more places to put this product, corn and soybeans specifically, here in the U.S. domestically. What's your take on whether this, we've talked about it over the last 3 or 4 years, but are we still moving in a direction where we think we can get there?
Well, I hope so. I mean, there's mixed signals from the Trump administration, but we need to get there, Clint. I mean, that's where the demand drivers need to be focused on. I always say that because I'm gonna date myself again. When I first got in this business in 1979, the U.S. accounted for 62% of world agricultural trade. We were it. I mean, that made us on top of the hill, and we really directed. In terms of trade, where commodities and where things really happen. Today, that number's down to 12%. So to your point, our slide because of Brazil and the Black Sea has been dramatic, and we now need to find another demand driver for U.S. agriculture. However, this administration, if you look back to the weekend and they're pulling off of the websites on climate friendly ideas and then, of course, pauses in payments, makes you wonder, where their heart and where their future really is. So I'm a little worried that the SAF may get kicked. I don't know how long it'll get kicked, if it's 6 months or a year or 3 or 4 years. But I do believe U.S. agriculture's future is in green diesel and green fuels, including SAF, and that's where our demand growth is going forward. But it takes policy. It takes someone at the helm and with a budget to make sure that all happens.
Yeah.
Dan, you think it's possible that this administration steps in and says, no, you're not going to import any more sugarcane used for SAF from Brazil? We're not doing that anymore. Do you think?
I think that could happen, Tyne. But what I need the administration to step up and say is that our platform is 45Z, and that we're going to really support renewable fuels and SAF going forward. And that's how we see the future. Right now the theme and thesis is all drill, baby, drill, and it's all about fossil fuels. If you don't have a vision that we need to move from one to the other, and we're going back to regenerative agriculture and clean labels, that's problematic. And I have a hard time working through all that. And that's part of the problem with the U.S. political system, is that we go from one thing to the next. The last administration under the Inflation Adjustment Act was all about green fuels and being climate friendly. This administration's not so climate friendly, but we don't know exactly where they come down on it. My concern on this administration is they just may not announce anything. In other words, leave 45Z to sit there for a long period of time, much like they did with ethanol waivers at his last administration. And we don't have guidance going forward. For guidance on SAF and green fuels, we need policy that sticks with support from the U.S. Treasury. If that doesn't happen, then we have issues. And I hope Elon doesn't get his nose too far into the biofuel tank, if you will, because he will find on ethanol and all of our biofuels that they have been subsidized almost all the way back to their creation back in, the early 2000s. So at some point, I do understand the need for biofuels to stand on their own economically. We just haven't reached that point just yet.
It's interesting. One of the conversations that was one of the speakers that was there in Fargo talked a little bit about the mandates from states like California, Oregon, Washington State, and was basically saying, regardless of what happens federally, these are state mandates, and we're going to have a demand for renewable diesel for trucks, transportation, independent of what happens. And so that's why you're seeing a lot of used cooking oil shipped into California, because they have a mandate that says you have to use this to drive through our state. And they really feel like that will help give some support under this market and they expect more of these types of mandates to come into play for, environmental reasons and what have you. But it was just kind of an interesting conversation, interesting perspective to see, regardless of the federal, we're still going to have a mandate by some of these states, and they're big states.
Mm-hmm.
And clearly we still have a federal mandate that hasn't gone away. I mean, we still had advanced biofuel mandates and all those kind of things. So some of these large petroleum firms will have to meet those mandates either through RINs or by the production of green fuel. So that is still there. But when I talk about demand drivers, what I need is another push over the hill, if you will, to get to that point that we are actually expanding our base of demand, not keeping it where it is today. And that's why I'm trying to think about this a little bigger in terms of the federal government getting involved to help in that push.
Yeah.
Let's get into our next segment. My next question, it leads into our next segment. What the Sigma? Well, Clinton was in friendly Fargo. That's what we're going to call it. I was in sunny San Antonio, Dan, where it was not a dry heat in Texas this week. That humidity, let me tell you, my weather app did not prepare me for that. But, Dan.
Your hair looks like a pound.
It had the big hair, huh? I don't feel bad for you because I was in Fargo.
I did have the big hair, and the second I walked outside, I don't even know why I had fixed it because it deflated really quickly. A little disappointed this week in my hair products. But anyway, Dan, no surprise. The mood at National Cattlemen's Beef Association CattleCon was good. It was really good.
Euphoric, I would hope. My God.
It was really good. But one thing,
a few new hats, Tyne? Was there a hats and some fresh boots out there on the floor?
I didn't ask. A lot of those, I don't think when cattle prices are good, even then they're going to get a new hat. You know what I mean? You just grab your one that you gravitate toward.
Quick story. I have some family in Oklahoma. They a few years ago when cattle prices really surged, they finally had their tax preparer pull them aside and say like, hey, you guys need to spend some money. Like, you haven't got to go and spend some money. You're just going to give it all back, buy a tractor or two. And so, no, I think that's how a lot of these folks roll is like, no, we're going to save it because it'll be the other direction in 5 minutes.
Absolutely. And that's what we were talking about, Dan, is, a couple years ago, these cattle producers, if you had somebody younger that was wanting to come back to the operation, it was, no, you can't. Let's do something, recommending that they do something else. Now with cattle prices so good, everybody's wanting to get into the cattle business. They just can't afford it. So Dan, when you look at cattle prices though, on our panel this week at NCBA, I had like Don Close, Daryl Peel, another guy named Casey Mabry from Texas. And their thought process is these phenomenal prices, it's not over yet. We're not over. When you look at the latest cattle inventory report, Dan, what do you think? Are we going to continue to see higher highs in this cattle market?
Well, I totally agree with them. I don't think this cycle is over for another 2.5 to 3 years.
What?
Yeah, no, this is going to keep going on. I mean, you say people are wanting to come back, but I don't see it in terms of the cow-calf operation, which is where I need it. So I believe that the beef industry, you remember last year, I told you, Tyne, it was a year of species. I still believe that the year of species going forward, probably to 2028. So if you think about the markets, I don't think cattle have formed their all-time highs yet. We'll have volatility. We'll get a big setback here as we're part of the problem nearby here is demand, which means that, as we're getting some of the illegals pushed back into Mexico, as we're looking at maybe thinning out the U.S. government, federal government, there's 3 million people working for the U.S. government per se around the Washington area. Let's say we lay off a half of them or they buy their way out. This will cause a demand hiccup and prices will come down, but boy, on the supply side of things, the beef market is going to go higher, and I believe cash cattle will make higher highs as we look towards the fourth quarter of this year than where we're sitting right now.
Dan, what lessons have you learned through the years whenever markets start to hit highs like this? Obviously, there's always a snap back the other direction at some point. Like a couple years from now, 3 years from now, at some point you see it start to go the other direction. What lessons have you learned in dealing with some of these peaks through the years?
All I'll say is we used to think more logically about different cycles and how farmers would react and how things would change in agriculture. And a lot of those cycles, I don't say are breaking, but they're changing. I say that we used to have a 9-year cattle cycle. That cycle no longer works anymore. And it's because the industry has become consolidated on the feedlot side of things. Cow calf, there's really no way to expand it. So I'm not seeing a lot of people putting up their hand of wanting to calve in February or March up in the northern plains or Montana or even down in Kansas. So as you think about it, it's a hard business. It's a hard way of life. It's hard to scale. And so with that, it's going to take a lot of time. And we're looking to the dairy industry to help out, obviously, to the tune of around 9 to 950,000 crosses every year. So dairy will help. They'll do their job, and that's happening now. But I still can't supply enough beef for this country. And even though imports are coming at a record fast pace, my point, Clint, is we look at cycles and we look at highs in the market. It isn't like it used to be. It used to be we'd flash a cattle market out in a couple of days. Now it takes more time to get a top in place. And so it just that profitability margin's got to stay there longer for it to happen. And I think that's kind of where we're at. And it's going to take more years, and that 9-year cattle cycle is now maybe something like 13 or 14. It'll come back down again, but it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of capital investment.
Yeah, a lot of capital. And Dan, do you think we're in the middle of changing the way the cattle industry looks? You know, I interviewed a cow-calf producer last week outside of Sedalia, Missouri, who talked to, he'd been in the business 50 years. Yep. And he said, a lot of my friends have sold while the prices are high, and they're not getting back in. They sold out. And so as we look at this older generation that's selling out, and we're losing some of that knowledge, losing some of that experience, but they're selling out when prices are high. Do you think we're just changing the way the cattle industry looks for good?
Well, I don't know if it's good or bad, Tyne. I mean, my thing is that if you think about the industry, I kind of like it the way it is. It's kind of like the floor of the Board of Trade, and we're spitting on each other. But that's my own personal view. I as I said before, I think it's hard to scale. I don't know how to take a cow-calf operation and really scale it to where it needs to be, where we're using pasture land and you're using everything else. And then if you look at, our friend JFK Jr. coming into regenerative agriculture, he's going to throw more embers on the fire in terms of, having more space and manure and all that other things to get that regenerative beef. So to me, it's a very hard proposition to get the beef cow herd, the mama cow herd coming back. If we do retain animals, that only takes beef supply away. And to your point, a lot of our cattlemen are in the mid 60s to mid 70s. They're just saying, it's been a great ride. I've had a lot of fun. I'm cashing out and enjoying the rest of my life, and I don't blame them. I think they've worked hard and it's deserved. Yeah, and so that's where my hit is. But I don't see the younger ones coming out of Texas and A&M saying, hey, I want to be a cow-calf man for the rest of my life.
Exactly. It is a tough industry. I mean, you talk about one, you grew up in the dairy industry, but there's not a lot of opportunities to get away and enjoy yourself when you have cattle. And I think some of these operations are deciding to do that now. But it's just, that was one topic of conversation while we were at Cattle Convention this week.
Oh, I can imagine it's a big topic of discussion. And I would really like to get the dairy industry where it can produce that, let's call it 1.5 million or 2 million. It's going to take some profitability, but maybe that's why a wet bull calf from the dairy industry is selling for over $800 today. Mm. I mean, nobody would have thought whether it's a cross calf is selling for that amount, but even a wet bull Holstein calf is selling for $500 to $550. So the market's trying to do its job to say, hey, we need to transition to more dairy on beef. We'll see how it happens. But the margin, sometimes just having a calf on a dairy animal is more than milking the cow the entire year.
Dan, have you been surprised at the resilience of consumer demand, given where we're at on prices? I mean, I feel like, 15, 20 years ago, when we went through something like this, you'd always see that consumer demand just fall through the floor.
Listen, Clint, I never would have thought in my career that I'd come to the month end of January, and we don't have a data yet, but we're going to average retail beef at $8.70 a pound. Who would have thought, right? I mean, the market used to get air sickness when we got above 330 to 350 years ago. So 850 is just amazing to me. I think we're going to hold. I think people have an appetite for beef. I think that the certification programs on like Angus beef and everything has been doing wonders for consistency of the product. And I think people like it. And so as long as we continue to build jobs and we can build futures, I think the beef market stays stronger than we can imagine. We're seeing a new plateau in terms of beef pricing and beef demand. That said, the other side of that is poultry, which we have avian flu, and it's just hard to get the flocks going and where we need to do to have chicken prices come down and we get rid of poultry fatigue, but we're not there yet. And it's going to take some time, but I still think this year ahead will be another year of species where prices for cattle, pork, and poultry do relatively well. Last year, the U.S. economy in terms of livestock produced a margin of $19 billion, a record. Who would have ever thought the U.S. livestock industry would do that and help largely offset what was happening in the grain market? So
and that's
a really big deal.
Yeah, that's wild. Hey, one of the things that we're What the Sigmas, which is, Dan, I got the high school kids in my house. They've got all these great sayings. What the Sigma, kind of like, what in the world? So one of the wildest headlines I saw this week, or statements I saw this week, is that there has been more snow in New Orleans than there has been in Lincoln or Omaha, Nebraska.
No, you're right. I think Omaha only had 1 inch so far this year. If I saw that motor.
Yeah, Zach, pull up our drought monitor map. As we get ready to go through the spring here, obviously there's still time for things to change, Dan. But it hasn't been an incredibly wet fall or winter through a lot of parts of the country. There's pockets here and there, but overall, I'm at the Northern Corn and Soybean Expo. They're starting to have conversations about, man, I hope it starts to snow here pretty soon. I hope we get a little bit of moisture. Are you hearing that grumbling going into this spring?
No, I am, especially in the West and the North. I mean, it's something that we're hearing, not so much east of the Mississippi River, but, I was down at the Gulf at one of my home down at the Gulf down there. And so to see 5 or 6 inches on the beach was something remarkable. But in saying that, the winter is also turning colder than normal. And so one of the things we use at AgResource to correlate with what the upcoming growing season will be is whether or not the temperature profile and where it sits. So if I had to have a lean at the moment, I would say that there are going to be some planting issues as we see a wet spring across the Tennessee Valley, maybe up to Ohio, but it's the West we got to keep our eye on in terms of the wheat area, and then moving northward to the northern plains and Canadian prairies.
Well, on that note, let's move on to team I can't believe this just happened, because I have something that falls in that category, planting related. So Zach, take it away. So surfing on X this weekend, farmers always get anxious to plant. And this weekend, Dan, it's been, we still have a little bit of snow that hasn't melted yet, but we were 60 degrees on Sunday. Like, it was a beautiful day. And I know a lot of areas had warmer temperatures, expecting a big snowstorm next week. But I saw this on X, a farmer in the northern Corn Belt that decided in January, I think it was January. I don't know, Zach, can you pull it up, the tweet? Yeah. January 31st, 2025. Ryan says, I may never forget this. Been doing March beans since 2018. Never had a March bean average under 75 bushels per acre. Asking these beans to set for 3 months. Conditions were beautiful. He planted January 31st. He planted. And we know that it is dry up in some of these areas, as you just mentioned. It was warming up, but it's been cold in other areas. So it's just been so interesting, as Clinton said, that we've been so cold and snow in areas that typically don't see it. Florida, Alabama, Eastern Texas, some of these areas. But then we've been mild in other areas. And it's just, I know when you hear Eric Snodgrass talk, and you hear Drew Lerner talk, and you hear some of these meteorologists talk, there is concern already about what happens this summer and concerns about drought. And Dan, I know it's too early to talk about drought, but we are hearing meteorologists that are always already looking at some of these patterns and are concerned. But can you believe this? Planting in January?
No, maybe we just need to be like Brazil, and we need to pull the planter, the combine through and just plant next November. But anyway, it's just amazing to me. And we've all talked about polymers on seed, and that someday, the polymers melt when we get to the right soil temperature and all these kind of things. The science is coming forward. So I tell everybody, go down and visit the Research Triangle down around Raleigh, and your eyes will spin in terms of pitless cherries and and peanuts that no longer have allergens in them and all of those kind of things, because I do believe in the next 10 years, we're going to see a lot of changes that really happen. And a lot of people talk about, oh God, we've reached our peak in terms of U.S. corn and soybean yields. We're not even close. They're going up yet. And so I know people want to talk that way, but I just look at the records being set on some of the contests that are out there. 630 bushels of corn. I'm not sure we're going there, but if you gave me good weather in the next year or two, I think I can do 190 on corn. So we'll see what happens. But
that was David. That was David out of Virginia, and he told us that he actually thinks that the yield potential on a bag of seed is 900 to 1,000 bushels per acre. He said, because that year I got 600. Conditions weren't perfect. And so it's interesting. He thinks that's where the yield potential is. And we have a national yield of just under 180 bushels per acre. Obviously, we're a long way from that. But to think that could potentially be the potential is just nuts.
Oh, it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. And what we're going to see in the next 10 or 20 years, I think, is amazing. I just want to make sure demand keeps up with all that supply. Wow. That's going to be the key. But that's just not a farmer.
It's interesting. I know you speak a lot to different groups around the country, and Tyne and I are in front of groups as well. And they always ask, do you think we're going to be able to feed a global population? And my personal opinion is, well, yeah, I think we'll be able to do it, because you see the innovation that's available to farmers, and they step up and they meet the needs all the time. Now, obviously, anything can change. There can be other issues that are outside of farmers' control, but there is so much potential and innovation in agriculture that, that's not the question that keeps me up at night. The question is, let's make sure we have markets for everything we can grow.
Now, you and I are aligned, Clint. I don't see a problem in feeding the world. That's never been a problem to me. And so I believe science will keep up. Sometimes government don't accept the science as quickly as I would like them to do that. But other than that, I think we need to move ahead and just get to the duty of making sure there's enough food on the table. And science will help us out. I don't have that issue. So I'm with you.
Dan, are you concerned at all about our population won't actually grow? I mean, you look at some of these key countries that we're actually seeing population decline. Is that at all, as an economist, is that all a concern that we actually aren't seeing the demand in the population grow like we've been told for all these years?
So without saying a name, I'm giving a speech to a very known board about that topic in the longer term outlook of agriculture. And it does bother me. I mean, when you look like a country like South Korea and Japan, which are just almost imploding in terms of their aging and not having enough young people coming along, China being in the same boat, we in the Americas could get the same area. In other words, our population would stagnate without immigration. So it is a concern. And when you look at where the population is expanding the most, which is Africa, I can't tell you if that country is going to be an exporter or importer of ag products. They're blessed with good land, but they've got cultural problems. And so I don't know which way this all goes. It's going to be interesting. But I do worry a little bit about the rapid aging about Southeast Asia and how that all fits. And then how the Indian government and their 900 million farmers, how they manage if there is an import profile into that country to satisfy both the farmer and the consumer. Today, wheat prices in India are above $10 a bushel. That's just an example of how the government there is more supportive of its farmers than bringing in wheat from abroad.
Yeah, that's it. It's pretty fascinating. Okay, so we've got this. I can't believe this happened. Dan, do you like award shows? Do you watch them?
Do I like what shows?
Award shows. Like,
oh yeah, no.
Grammys. Okay,
I watch them, sure. But I don't wear the crazy outfits because some of those at the Grammys were over my head.
I know some of the outfits were a little over our head. Listen, this is my TMI. I can't believe this happened moment for this week. Is at the Grammys. We're singing a song. Hit play on that, Zach, if you would. This is one of the most amazing things. We could turn it down a little bit too, Zach. We'll just talk over it. But this is one of the most amazing things I've seen in a show. The way that this guy handled himself, going transition from one part of his song to his next song. And Tyne, I think maybe for the next Unscripted, I could get maybe one of these onesies there where maybe you think, with that dear.
I want you, I need you.
Right. Can't believe that's your TMI. Can't believe this just happened moment from the Bruins.
Well, okay, you got, I'm Pebble.
Okay. Great.
I will only allow you to wear a onesie if you do a flip like that, number one. And number two, out of all of the outfits, that's your TMI. Can't believe that's it. Not Kanye's wife.
Well, listen, it's a family show here. It's a family show-ish. So but I can't believe who does a flip off of a piano live on the air. That was wild to me. Wow. Very impressive.
We don't watch the Grammys at our house. We don't watch any award shows at our house. So, but then, but you don't need to because you get the highlights on social media. So as you scroll through, you see everything. And yes, the choices. I mean, I guess they do it for headlines. Dan, I'm not going to talk about outfits because I kind of went off on a tangent with Jim Wiesmeyer on our last episode about Jeff Bezos' wife outfit, her outfit.
Yeah,
yeah. Oh, I mean, I just
how uncalled for in the Anyway, at the inauguration, we'll leave it at that.
So somebody may be offended by my Chiefs gear this week, but you'll never catch me in that.
Here's one for both of you, which is I had a question this week, and I want to ask both of you.
Oh,
if you were to describe what's happening with the Trump administration today in one word, what would that word be? One word. What's happening in Washington in the Trump administration? Because it was a good report. It was a good question that someone asked me from a reporter asked me this, and I struggled a little with it, but I want you to at least, if you got a word that comes to mind.
I got a word. Because I believe elections have consequences, I'm going to say reckoning.
Reckoning. Okay.
Reckoning.
I have a word. Your word. You have a word? Sorry, I'm pushing it back on you guys.
No, you should. Yeah, I mean, I was going to say chaos, Dan, but it's predictable chaos. Like this, doing everything that he said he was going to do. Is it chaotic? Yes. Is he catching people off guard? Yes. But this is, I mean, we're going down the list. This is everything that he said that he was going to do. And so I would say organized chaos or predictable chaos, but it's chaos. I mean, and I have seen complete meltdowns on social media about what's happening out of everything, talking about, disassembling the Department of Education. We're seeing everything that's going on with some of these funding that they're cutting back. Out of everything, what's been the most surprising to you, Dan?
Well, I'm going to give you my word first, which was demolition. I think the administration is demolitioning the government as it was to kind of, I don't know, what's it, drain the swamp is right, but he's demoing to rebuild it. And so the word that comes to my mind is demoing, or demolition. So that's what I came up with. But I'm always interested to hear other people's take on it all. And your words were great.
Well, one of the things we always talk about, Dan, is we always talk about velocity. And with the Trump administration, it's not just the news comes fast, it's the velocity of news, that it is so fast and so much comes at you. On one hand, it's kind of hard to report because by the time you finish, it could change.
It could change, or there's a new headline. I mean, the one thing we know about this president is he likes to be in the headlines every day. And unlike the last president, you guys in the news side of things have your job. It's going to be like double time or triple time or quadruple time, because I don't know how you stay ahead of him. He has got more energy than I can ever imagine. And the news cycle has dramatically changed from the last 4 years.
You don't stay ahead of it. But even this week, I saw people complaining because he was going to play golf somewhere. And, even when he's playing golf, he's still making headlines and negotiating and doing business. So that's the thing is, whereas with Biden, I mean, it was pretty much headlines hit 8-3 maybe. On the weekends, he went home to Delaware. We didn't have much news happen on the weekends. We just did it. We talked about it from a group, from Farm Journal, from a content team, is we have to be staffed for news to break on the weekends, news to break after 3:00 on a Friday. It is a round the clock news cycle, and you have to be staffed for it because the headlines are changing and it's impacting farmers and ranchers. It's just the way it is.
Dan, what do you think? What's your feedback that you're getting about, you said demoing or demolition to rebuild?
I'm getting,
what are people saying?
I mean, everything I hear is positive. I mean, people I think are very supportive of what's happening, and that we're shocked a little bit on USAID in terms of all the money and where it was going on. Not use names, but it's kind of like, really? And so to me, this is what needs to happen and shake up government. I'm not prepared to say that the next presidential candidate will be Elon, though it's been suggested many, many times to me. But I think what's going on is needed, and it's a fresh break. It's kind of like running a company for 250 years and never shaking the cobwebs or cleaning the draperies. And we're doing that right now.
When you look at USAID real quick, I saw a bunch of that on social media. We've seen a ton of the talk. And there was a question some of this grain that we're sending to other countries, is it U.S. grain? Or is it actually grain that we buy from other countries, and then that's what we're sending? Or is it money that we're sending to some of these countries? Dan, do you know?
I think it's a little bit of everything. We give them, we used to have a program called PL 480, which we gave American grain. And then people got angry because we were only helping people to get hooked on American grain. Then we started giving them foreign grain from others. And then we started giving them cash. And today I know it's still a blend of all three. So I don't think we can specifically say one or the other. We can put it in maybe monetary terms, but people have asked me to put it in tonnage or bushel terms. And I just can't figure it out. There's too much going on and we don't have numbers that are reliable. So we'll wait to see, but I don't think it's a tremendous amount that's affecting the grain markets or something that is going to be climatic for us down the road.
Dan, as you look out, and obviously we've kept you for almost an hour here, but as you look out and you start to kind of wrap your arms around 2025, give me two things. What are you most optimistic about, and what is your lookout or watch out for 2025?
So what I'm most optimistic about is the cattle market and species in general. I hope I'm on record again, just like I was last year, and saying I think there's a bull market there and we haven't reached our highs, though there's going to be a tremendous amount of volatility back and forth. And if you're in that business, you still have to hedge and make sure that you're protecting margin. That's the message to every cattleman or hogman or poultry producer that's out there. The thing that's got me watching out is we've all gotten used to what I believe is an economy that is resilient. We look back to the pandemic, and I'm a little worried as we get to some of the immigration pushes that are going to the South, if we get some layoffs from Washington, that maybe there's a slowdown ahead. So we're on that cusp where I don't worry so much about inflation. I worry about stagflation. I think stagflation is a word we're using in our office more frequently than I'd like. And so those are things to think about. There will be some items that go up in value because of tariffs, but there's going to be some softness in economic demand that is going to be worrisome to some sectors of the ag economy when we go forward. It's going to be related to tariffs and where products come from and how this whole world rejiggers itself in terms of trade flows and what all happens. It's just kind of where we're going on the whole overall thing.
Fascinating, Dan. It is always fascinating to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us for Unscripted this weekend. I really do appreciate it.
Awesome to see you again.
It's been a lot of fun, and I wish everybody has a good weekend and a very safe rest of winter and early spring.
Thanks, Dan.
All right, we'll keep working on that flip off that piano. We'll get it next time. All right, we'll get you jumping off that piano.
You and Barry Gibbs, we'll have a run out. Right? I can see the pictures already, Clint.
Dan's going to be a top producer, so maybe I should try to find a way to get a piano for our U.S. Farm Report live taping at Top Producer because Dan will be there. We're going to take a deep dive into Brazil. We didn't really get into Brazil much here. We're going to do that at Top Producer. So if you haven't signed up for Top Producer, we would love to have you. There's still time to sign up to visit Top Producer. Dan, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
And good to see you.
All right, Clinton, before we go, I have a couple pictures real quick.
Do it.
Yep. Chiefs. I mean, I've started off with it that way.
Well,
I'm telling you, Kansas City has learned to do it big. Yes. And so Union Station, last weekend, we went to take pictures with all of that. They have tons of backdrops and things for coming up for the Chiefs. But I did, and I think there's one more picture to show, but I wore my Chiefs sweatshirt on the way home from NCBA. And I had a really long layover in Dallas. And as I'm sitting there working, minding my own business, because I'm not going to be, Chiefs fans, I mean, we're not going to walk around and tout ourselves besides wearing the gear. Anyway, so as I'm sitting there working, I look up and there's this guy laughing, looks at me and laughing. I'm like, what is he laughing at? Well, then I notice he has an Eagles hat on and I'm just sitting there as I'm working, logging video, writing a package. I'm like, it's about to go down. It's about to go down at gate 17 here at the Dallas Love Field airport. So I just want you to know we've been friendly, but the second he looked at me and saw my sweatshirt and laughed,
game on. Here we go. Game on.
Game on.
Well, good luck to them. Good luck to everybody. Tyne, you have a favorite fast food or a favorite Super Bowl food that you enjoy? What do you
tells people that I'm a creature of habit, so I make the same things every time.
7-layer dip. You have a 7-layer dip.
Buffalo chicken dip is my go-to. It's actually Missy Cleva from our office. Whenever I was in South Bend, I love food. This is no secret. I love food. So we used to have office parties and office luncheons. So we did a soup lunch one time. We did a bunch of different things. Well, Missy always brought a buffalo chicken dip, and she shared her recipe, and that has become a favorite for people around here.
Oh, so good. It's so good. Well, this is not fancy. It is very predictable, but I like the Super Bowl Little Smokies. I'm just a fan. I don't eat them all year, have them once a year, usually at the Super Bowl. You know, they put the grape jelly in, they put the barbecue sauce in there, and it's just, I don't know, it's good. I enjoy it.
It's James's favorite food. Whenever, like on Father's Day, I'm like, hey, well, it's your chance to pick the meal. What do you want? He's like, Little Smokies and mashed potatoes and corn. Are you serious? That's really the one meal that you get to pick? That's what you're picking? He loves it too. Yeah, he loves it too. But we do. I think it's we've done seafood before. We go to my aunt and uncle's. We've done seafood before. I think this year's barbecue. So I think we're doing barbecue, and I'm bringing the Chiefs cookies and all of that. But it'll be a good weekend.
Well, snap some pictures. We'll show them on the next Unscripted of all the festivities. All right. Sounds good. Hey, we want to thank everybody for watching Unscripted. It is such a fun show to produce. And even had some people in Fargo come up and say, hey, love watching Unscripted.
No way.
Yes. Awesome. It was awesome.
Yeah, I took several notes from Dan of things that I've got to follow up on the show. He was a wealth of knowledge. So a big thank you to our sponsor, BASF. Thanks for sponsoring Unscripted. Until next time. See you later.
We'll see you then.
Thanks for joining us. You can dive into more of Unscripted on Farm Journal's YouTube channel and listen to it anywhere podcasts are found. I'm Clinton Griffiths.
And I'm Tyne Morgan. From all of us here at Farm Journal, keep it real as you live your life unscripted.
Unscripted is a production of Farm Journal Studios, where no one grows alone.